Hi guys. Welcome back to CRYPTID'S Den. It's always a good day when we're here together. Life's got its ups and downs, twists and turns. But somehow, we keep showing up, and that's something worth smiling about. I hope today brought you at least one little win. Tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this wild little journey reaches. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. You never know who you'll connect with. Now, let's get into it. Have you ever thought Bigfoot was just a myth? I did. Until the summer of 1957, when one stepped out of the fog holding a salmon like a peace offering. No roar, no threat, just breakfast, left gently by the stream for someone they trusted. That was the summer I learned not every giant, hairy creature in the woods is something to fear. Some of them are just trying to live quietly, far from human eyes. My name is Caleb Hartley. I was 13 when I was sent to live with my great-aunt Mavis in a rotting wooden cabin deep in Maple Creek Hollow. They said she was crazy, but on our first morning, I saw something that told me she wasn't alone. She wasn't alone. We kept seeing them, a family of Bigfoot, a silent father, a gentle mother carrying a baby, and 3 curious little ones peeking through our window. Mavis wasn't afraid. She left out pie. And in return, they brought wild berries wrapped in grass. A quiet exchange. A kind of trust. They once saved her life, carried her home from a freezing stream after an accident. Never spoke, never showed their faces, but they were there when no one else was. Later, one of the little ones placed a carved stick in my hand. No words. Just a symbol. An invitation. And I understood. They weren't monsters. But not everyone sees like we did. A hunter came. One of the young ones got caught in his trap. And when the Bigfoot father appeared, towering in silence, he didn't strike. He just held his injured child and looked at that man with eyes that weren't wild. They were human, protective. That night, they sat with us near the stream. No sounds, no rituals, just presence. And in the moonlight, the mother placed a bunch of ghost pipe beside our porch. A plant that heals grief, a silent thank you. If you think this is a story about monsters, you're wrong. It's about kindness, misunderstood. About creatures who never needed to be worshipped or even believed in, just left alone, and treated with the same dignity they gave to a lonely woman once lost in the woods. Sometimes, the wildest beings carry the kindest hearts. The first time I saw them, they were already watching us. It was the summer of '57, and the sky over Maple Creek Hollow always felt too big for the valley it covered. Like the clouds were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I was 13 then, all bones and scraped knees. Fresh out of Chattanooga with a duffel bag and a bad haircut. My mom had dropped me and my best friend Eli off at the foot of the dirt road, said she. Be back before August. She never was. Mavis Dalton, my aunt on my daddy's side, stood barefoot in the doorway of her old cabin, one hand on her hip, the other holding a chipped mug that smelled like sassafras and something stranger. She didn't smile much, but her eyes didn't flinch either. You eat meat? She asked instead of saying hello. Her place sat crooked by a stream that split the trees like a secret, and the woods behind it didn't whisper. They listened. I remember that part most. By the third night, Eli and I had stopped pretending we weren't scared. We kept hearing things. Soft knocking sounds that weren't wind. A deep thud like a tree trunk groaning under something heavy. The windows were always smudged come morning, streaked with what looked like muddy handprints too big for any man I ever met. One night, Eli pointed to the back door and said, Caleb, there's hair stuck in the screen. I touched it. Coarse. Black. Still warm. That was the night I asked Aunt Mavis straight up if someone, or something, was out there. She didn't blink, just poured more chicory into her cup and said, They come for food, not for trouble. I wanted to laugh, but Something in her tone made me stop. We started paying attention. The way the trees swayed even when there was no wind, the fish guts missing from the bucket before dawn. Once, I found a pile of stacked stones near the back porch, neatly arranged like a little altar. "They don't like shouting," Mavis said once when Eli and I fought over a comic. "And they don't understand lies." I didn't ask how she knew that. The real change came on a fog-thick morning just after sunrise. Eli and I were skipping rocks at the bend of the creek, water cold and fast around our bare ankles. That's when we saw it, a figure half shadow, half man, standing knee-deep in the stream about 20 feet upstream. Broad shoulders hunched like old oak limbs, hair dripping down to his waist. His face was half-turned, eyes dark like creek-bed stone. But it was the calm that froze us. In one massive hand he held a fish, silver, wriggling, fresh from the current. He looked right at us, then laid the fish down on a flat rock between us and him, and stepped back into the trees. No sound, no roar, no war. We walked up to the rock slowly, like approaching a sleeping bear. The fish was still flapping, bleeding slightly from the gills, perfectly intact, not bitten, not mauled. "Offered." "I thought monsters didn't leave gifts," I muttered. Eli said nothing. He just looked into the woods like he expected something to come back. Later that day, when Mavis saw the fish cleaned and cooking on the porch stove, she just nodded. "They're watching," she said. "But not in the way you think." From that morning on, something shifted in me. I stopped trying to name what I didn't understand. I started listening more to the wind, to the way pine needles crunched under bare feet, to the hush that fell over everything when the creek sang a little louder than usual. The woods weren't empty, and they weren't trying to scare us. They were watching, maybe waiting. Sometimes, after dinner, Mavis would sit on the porch with her feet tucked under her and hum old gospel tunes low in her throat. That's when I saw the shadows move just beyond the tree line. Soft silhouettes, too big, too tall, not running, not hiding. Just being. Eli tried once to shine a flashlight at them. Mavis slapped it out of his hand. "If you want to be seen," she said, "let them decide how." We never used lights again. Nights were different after that. Not quieter, never that. But less sharp around the edges. We'd hear the soft knocking again, sometimes 2 taps, sometimes 4. One night, I woke to find a line of pebbles laid out in a neat arc by the front steps, like a half circle pointing inward. Another night, something left a bundle of moss and bones wrapped in birch bark at the edge of the garden. Mavis treated it all like weather, not good or bad, just present. You don't owe them anything, she told me once, but you do owe the woods your respect. That stuck with me. I think that's the thing I want folks to understand. We didn't see them, not fully. Not like in books or blurry photos. But we felt them. Their presence hummed in the air, like the way you can feel someone watching you through the back window before they even knock. Only they never knocked. They didn't have to. They already knew we were there. That summer wasn't about fear. It was about the kind of silence that holds meaning. The kind that stretches between people, or beings who don't share language, but share space. I still remember the shape of his shoulders in that morning fog, the way he stepped back after offering that fish, as if saying, "We see you? Now, what will you do with that?" I didn't answer then, but I think I've spent the rest of my life trying to. That second week, the air around the house changed. Not louder, just heavier. Like the trees had leaned in closer overnight and decided not to lean back. Mavis had started baking more, always in the evenings. Apple pies mostly, sometimes berry if she'd foraged well. The smell would roll through the screen door, sweet and spiced, drifting out across the porch and down into the dark where the yard met the tree line. She never said who it was for. One night, after supper, she set a small plate out on the top step, just a thick slice of pie with a folded napkin beside it. like she was expecting company. Then she went back inside and didn't mention it again. Me and Eli just stared at each other, too curious to sleep. So we waited. It was past midnight when they came. No footsteps, no rustling. Just presence. The way a room feels different when someone walks in behind you, only colder. I was the first to see them. Eli had dozed off, his head on my shoulder, but I stayed watching that stretch of woods past the porch like it might blink. They stepped out of the mist without a sound. First the big one, same figure we'd seen down at the stream. Then another beside him, smaller but still towering over any human woman. And on her back there was movement, something shifting beneath a thick sling of fur. A baby, I realized. Then two more figures, lower to the ground, scuttling out from behind the bigger ones. 3 of them, just barely waist high. I couldn't breathe right. The adult male stood at the edge of the yard, half in shadow, not moving. The female stepped forward. Slow, measured. Her eyes scanned the porch. Then one of the little ones broke formation, bounding forward like a curious deer. It climbed halfway up the porch steps, peering in through the screen, its face just inches from mine. Its breath fogged the glass. And that's when Eli woke up. He saw it, gasped, and jerked back so fast he knocked the metal tray right off the windowsill. The clatter rang out like gunshots in that quiet. Pie, tin, fork, napkin, all over the floor. I swear my heart stopped. The little creature startled but didn't flee. It blinked, tilted its head, then looked back toward the mother. And she moved. She came forward, not fast, not threatening, but deliberate. The baby on her back shifted, and one of the smaller ones clung to her leg. She stepped up onto the porch, looked down at the mess we'd made, then slowly reached into the netted pouch around her hip. What she pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a bundle, a tight clutch of small fruits wrapped in leaves, dark berries, forest-picked. She bent, so close I could smell the rain still clinging to her hair, and laid the bundle gently where the pie had been. Then she stepped back. The others followed her retreat. Not a sound, not even the creak of the porch boards. And just like that, they faded back into the trees. No drama, no warning. Just gone. Eli finally spoke. She brought a gift. Mavis had been standing in the hallway, watching through the slats of the screen door. She didn't move until the woods were empty again. Then she came out, knelt, and picked up the berry bundle. She looked at it like she was reading something I couldn't see. "You broke the silence," she said to Eli, voice soft but firm. But they still chose kindness. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her eyes. Wide, dark, not human, but not wild either. There was no hate in them, no fear either. Just something ancient and tired. The next morning, Mavis dried the berries and stored them in a glass jar beside the herbs on her shelf. She said they were elderberries, the kind used for syrup and fever. "I think she knows what hurts," Mavis said, more to herself than us. For the next week, the ritual continued. Mavis left food, sometimes pie, sometimes cornbread, sometimes deer jerky. And always, something came back. Wild roots, dried moss. Once, a bundle of pine resin wrapped in bark. Every exchange silent, respectful, no face-to-face, just offerings placed in each other's absence. One night I asked her how long this had been going on. "Since after the flood," she said. "What flood?" But I noticed she started baking with more care, cutting the crusts into leaf shapes, adding cinnamon we didn't have before. She even let me help one night. Taught me how to flute the edges of a pie without tearing the dough. "They noticed details," she said. "It felt like we were preparing for guests, sacred ones. Sometimes I thought I heard them earlier than usual. Branches creaking too evenly, a breath near the window that didn't fog the glass but felt like it should. I stopped being afraid of it. I started expecting it. Then came the night the baby cried. It was soft, almost a whimper. I'd heard raccoons screech and owls wail. But this was different. This had rhythm. Hurt. It echoed faintly across the clearing just after dusk. Mavis stood up from the rocking chair, pie still warm in her hands. She didn't say a word. Just walked out to the porch and set the plate down like usual. But this time, she stayed, and we stayed with her. The forest shifted. Branches parted. The mother came first. Hunched low, the baby limp in her arms. I could see the fur around its jaw matted darker. The other little one stayed back, quiet. The father stood farther off, tense. Mavis crouched down, slow, lifted the pie in both hands and held it out. Not toward the baby, but toward the mother. She took it, held it, sniffed it, held it, sniffed it, then turned and disappeared into the dark. That was the first time they didn't leave anything in return. That was the night I realized it wasn't about trade. It was about trust. It took a long time for that feeling to leave my chest. The weight of knowing something bigger than us had chosen to keep coming back. Not because they had to, not because they wanted what we had, but because we listened. Because we fed the woods without asking for anything back. And still, somehow, they gave more than we ever did. We never asked why. We just waited. Because we knew they would come again, and the silence would come with them. Mavis never talked much about her past, not unless the night was long and the fire was low and you'd proven yourself quiet enough to earn it. She held her stories like heirlooms, tucked in dusty drawers, only taken out when someone needed to remember how to survive. But that night, the one after the second gift had been returned and the woods felt closer than usual. She told us something I still don't fully understand, even now. It had started 4 years before that summer, back when her husband, Silas, was still alive, and the old garden hadn't been swallowed by nettles. Mavis used to go out after supper, gathering herbs along the stream. Wild lettuce, ghost pipe, willow bark. Said the forest always left her what she needed if she listened hard enough. That one night, she wandered farther than usual. The storm had just passed, left the air wet and buzzing. She followed the scent of rain and found herself near the stone bend of the creek, trying to reach a patch of lettuce that grew under a slippery ledge. She leaned forward. 1 foot gave. The rock twisted under her boot, and she fell. It wasn't a long drop, maybe 6 or 7 feet, but the way she landed, ankle first, twisted sideways against a root, it knocked the wind out of her. She said the pain hit like lightning and nausea all at once. Couldn't even cry out. The water was up to her ribs, cold and fast, pulling at her legs. Her lantern had smashed against the rocks. Darkness closed in quick. She tried crawling up the bank, but her leg buckled. Said the world narrowed to just the roar of the current, and her breath catching in her throat. Then, over the water, past the bend, something moved. She thought it was a bear at first. But bears don't walk that steady. She told us she saw a figure, tall, broad, hunched slightly at the shoulders like it carried weight no one else could see. It didn't lurch forward. It didn't sniff the air. It just came straight for her, wading through the current like it was nothing. She tried to scoot back, kicked with her good leg, splashed and screamed, but it didn't stop. Then she said she looked up, really looked, and saw its eyes. Not wild, not cruel. Just ancient. She said it didn't reach for her like a predator. It stooped, 1 knee in the mud, and lifted her like a child. She felt the fur against her arms, smelled pine and moss, and something musky, earthy, deep. Her head lolled against its chest. Everything spun. And then blackness. When she woke, she was in Silas' old fishing boat. It had been pulled halfway up the bank, nestled in a clearing she didn't recognize at first. A blanket had been draped over her. Her boot was gone. Her ankle was wrapped in damp leaves and tied with bark strips. Next to her, tucked in a curve of canvas, was a pile of mushrooms, chanterelles. the kind she used for stew, and a clutch of wild lettuce, a bundle of yarrow, sprigs of mint. The air smelled like morning. The pain in her leg had dulled to a throb. She tried standing, made it 2 steps before sitting back down, waited until the sun warmed the trees before limping home. Said she told no one, not even the sheriff who came around asking about unusual sightings that same week. She didn't want to be locked up, didn't want to become a story people whispered about in town. We listened to her in silence, the kind of silence that bends around the firelight and holds tight to every word. Then she said something I didn't expect. "They didn't save me because they knew me," she said, eyes fixed on the dark outside. "They saved me because they saw someone just as forgotten as they were. That stayed with me. Hit deeper than the creek or the footprints or the berries on the porch." I asked her, maybe too quickly, if it was the mother, the same one who came now. Mavis nodded. Slow. I didn't see her face again. Until the night she brought the fruit, she held her wrist up, showed us something I hadn't noticed before. A mark, faint, just above the bone. Looked like a scar at first, but as she turned it in the firelight, I could see it clearer. An imprint, like the edge of a hand had once rested there too long. Wide palm, long fingers, pressed into her skin, but not deep. A memory etched in flesh. She laid her hand on mine, Mavis whispered. The same way you'd settle a baby chick in your palm. Then she left. And I knew she didn't need to explain. There was a connection there. One not born from language or debt, but from shared absence, shared solitude. 2 beings, 1 woman, 1 creature, who'd both slipped through the cracks of the world and landed in the same quiet place. That night, I dreamed about the creek. Only in the dream, it wasn't rushing. It was still, glass flat, and something stood in the middle of it, not frightening, not familiar either. Just watching, not moving, waiting. When I woke up, the window was cracked open, even though I was sure I'd latched it. There was a sprig of mint on the sill, damp, fresh picked. Eli didn't see it. Mavis said nothing, but I knew. I think she knew too. Sometimes I wonder how close I came to being forgotten. If Mavis hadn't taken us in, if she hadn't already known what it felt like to be lifted out of dark water by something you couldn't explain but trusted anyway. We don't always choose the ones who save us. Sometimes they find us because they recognize the same quiet in our bones. And sometimes you never say their name out loud. You just remember the touch of their hand, the hush that follows, and the way the river changed after that, like it knew, like it remembered too. There's a kind of silence in the woods that doesn't feel empty. It's thick, almost alive, like the trees are holding their breath, waiting for you to notice what's already there. That was the kind of quiet that hung around Maple Creek the morning I wandered off the path. Eli had gone to help Mavis with the smokehouse, and I was left to my own devices. 13 years old, itchy with curiosity, and still riding the high of the stories Mavis had told us the night before. I wasn't looking for anything, not exactly, but part of me hoped something might find me. The air smelled like cedar and sun-warmed stone. I followed the creek downstream, past the sycamores that leaned over the water like old men with secrets. I knew those woods well enough by then to not be scared, but I stayed quiet. No whistling, no stomping. Just me in the hush of the trees. That's when I saw them. 3 shapes darting between the trunks ahead. Small, quick, and not quite human. At first I thought it was raccoons playing chase, but when one of them leapt from a fallen log and landed upright, arms swinging like a boy, but legs bent wide and low like an animal, my breath caught. They didn't run from me. They didn't growl or bare teeth. They just kept playing. There was a clearing up ahead, framed by tulip poplars and white ash, where the sunlight broke through like stained glass. The kids, if you could call them that, were tumbling through it, laughing in their own way. making these soft chirps and clicks I'd never heard before. One of them climbed halfway up a tree, swinging down with a long stick in hand, chasing another through the leaves. They looked young, no taller than my chest, covered in a coat of reddish-brown fur that thinned out around the hands, the feet, the face. Not quite ape. Not quite anything I'd ever seen. Their eyes were the strangest thing, large, reflective, almost silver in the light, and full of curiosity. One of them noticed me, froze mid-motion. The others followed suit. We stared at each other across that clearing, maybe 20 yards between us, like two groups of kids at opposite ends of a baseball diamond. Then one of them, smaller than the rest, with a crooked left ear and a long stripe of darker fur down its back, lifted its hand, not waving, not threatening. Just acknowledging. I raised mine too. No one moved, no one ran. The one with the crooked ear took a step forward, then another. Slowly, like a deer testing the air. I didn't move. I didn't speak. My pulse was pounding like a drum in my neck, but I held still. It reached the edge of the clearing, looked around, then held something out. A stick. No, not a stick. It was curved like a question mark. Smooth, polished in places, darkened in others. I saw shallow grooves running down the sides, crude carvings, almost like fingers had pressed into the wood before it dried. And at the bottom, a shallow imprint of a hand. Not human, but close. I stepped forward. 2 paces. 3. The creature waited. When I got close enough, it didn't flinch. Just extended the object and pressed it into my palm. I swear I felt heat where our fingers brushed. Then it stepped back, turned, and vanished into the trees like smoke. The others followed, their shapes swallowed by trunks and fern, as if they'd never been there at all. I stood in that clearing a long time, not moving, holding that strange gift like it might crumble if I breathed too hard. Mavis called it later the clearing of trust. Said she hadn't seen it since she was a girl, and she only found it once. She said it didn't show up unless you were supposed to find it. When I handed her the stick, she didn't speak for a full minute, just traced the grooves with her thumb, then set it down on the mantel like it belonged there, next to a faded picture of Silas and a bundle of dried lavender. "That's a trust token," she said finally. "They don't give those to just anyone." I asked her what it meant. She smiled, tired. "Means they're watching. Means they think you won't hurt what you don't understand." That night, I dreamed of the clearing again. But this time, I was part of it, running, swinging from trees, laughing with something that wasn't quite a voice, but felt full of joy. I woke with my chest aching like I'd been running all night. The token was still on the mantel, but somehow I felt like it had marked me. Not in a bad way. In a way that said you belong to something now. Even if you don't know what it is, even if no one ever tells you the rules, all I knew was this. Those weren't animals. They weren't monsters either. They were children. And somehow, they'd invited me to stay. It was sometime after the clearing, after the stick with the carved handprint, after the moment I stopped wondering if they were real and started thinking about them like neighbors, quiet, old, and watching. Summer in Maple Creek had a way of bending time, stretching days like taffy. You'd think nothing could touch us out there, not up in those hills, not under Mavis' roof. But you'd be wrong. That night started like any other. Humid. Crickets buzzing in waves. Porch light off. Mavis had gone to bed early, tired from smoking venison all day. Eli and I were still up, flipping through a stack of old magazines by lantern light. I remember the moment I heard it. Metal clinking, not far off. Not natural, not autural, not something that belonged. I looked at Eli. He looked at me. Then came the sound. A sharp, quick yelp. Pain. Not human. We were out the door before we knew what we were doing. Boots half-laced. Flashlight bouncing in my hand. We followed the noise across the side yard, past the sugar maple, to the edge of the lower field. And there, just past the fence line, something thrashed in the tall grass. I aimed the light and froze. It was one of the little ones, one of the children from the clearing. Its leg was caught in a metal trap. Old-style, cruel thing, all rusted teeth and spring tension. The kind men bury and forget until something innocent stumbles through. The creature was on its side, fur, soaked in sweat, eyes wide and wild, mouth open, but no sound coming out now. Just heavy, shuddering breaths. Eli whispered my name, but it didn't land. I dropped the flashlight and ran. The trap was old but strong. It took everything I had to force the jaw open. My fingers bled. The thing whimpered. Tried to crawl away even as I worked. I don't know how long it took, but finally, I pried it loose. The second the jaw snapped open, it rolled away from me, clutching its leg, not running but trying to disappear into shadow. That's when the trees broke open. A sound like thunder cracked across the clearing. Heavy footsteps, bark crunching, and then he was there. The father, the one I'd seen with the fish, the one who never came close. He stood at the edge of the clearing, backlit by the moon, so massive he blocked out the sky. His chest heaved. His breath came in low rumbles, the kind that shake your ribcage even from 30 feet away. I thought that was it. I really did, but he didn't move toward me. He walked past me, steady, intent, not in a rush, but with purpose in every step. The little one, still huddled in the grass, looked up and let out a soft cry. The father knelt, wrapped him in those enormous arms, pulled him in against his chest like he was made of paper and breath. I didn't dare move. Then he turned, not to leave, not to vanish into the trees. He turned to face Bo Tiller. I didn't hear Bo approach, but I saw him now. 20 yards off, shotgun slung over one arm, looking like a man who'd just stepped in something foul. He was known around the county for hunting on land that wasn't his, drinking too hard, saying things you didn't repeat. Rumor was he'd been talking about the thing by Mavis' place for weeks. Now here he was, rifle in hand, face pale as dust. The father didn't growl. He didn't bare teeth. He stepped between Bo and the child, one slow step at a time. Then he stopped, no more than 10 feet from him. They locked eyes, and I swear Bo flinched first. Not because the thing looked angry, because it didn't. Because what stared back at him wasn't rage. It was warning, controlled, measured, final. And maybe that scared Bo more than anything. I watched his hands tremble, watched the barrel of that shotgun dip just a little. He stepped back once, twice. Then he turned, stumbled. The father exhaled once, low and long, then turned back, still cradling the little one, and disappeared the same way he came. I stood there until my legs went numb. Eli caught up, shaking, whispering if I was okay. I told him I didn't think that was the right question anymore. We went back inside. Mavis was sitting up, fully dressed, like she'd known it was coming. She didn't ask what happened. She poured a cup of chamomile tea, set it on the table, and said quietly, "He could have killed him." She didn't have to say who. Then she looked at me. "But he chose mercy. Can we do the same?" I didn't answer her that night, but I never forgot what she asked. Because it didn't matter if those things had names, or towns, or papers that said they belonged here. They had families. They had rules. They knew pain. And more than anything else, they knew restraint. That's when I started asking myself, not what they were, but what we were. What we chose to be when no one was watching. And sometimes, who we chose to spare. That Sunday evening, the air felt different, like it had been washed and wrung out, left heavy with things that hadn't been said. After what happened with Bo and the trap, nobody talked much. Eli barely spoke for 2 days. Mavis moved around the house slower than usual, like each step was measured. Not just about the child we freed, but about what came next. Then she started cooking, Not regular cooking, not pie for the porch cooking. I'm talking a full spread. Bison ribs, roasted squash, sweet apples halved and glazed in sorghum syrup, corn in the husk, blackened on open flame. She cooked like someone setting a table for guests who weren't coming through the front door. She didn't explain herself. She just said, "Tonight, we eat outside." She laid it all out near the edge of the creek, on a broad, flat rock that caught the last of the sunset in its grain. No plates, no forks. Just folded cloth napkins and the scent of warmth rising off roasted meat and buttered vegetables. She lit no lanterns, said the moon would handle it. Eli and I followed her down to the edge just as the shadows began to stretch. We sat quietly, backs straight, every sound around us sharper than usual. A whippoorwill called from somewhere past the ridge. The water whispered along the stones. And for a long while, it felt like that's all there would be. Like maybe this was for us, but it wasn't. They came without sound. One moment it was just the three of us. The next, there were 6. They emerged from the edge of the trees, their shapes half hidden in the mist off the creek. The father first, always the one to step forward, then the mother, still carrying the youngest. The 2 others held back, cautious but curious. The father looked at Mavis, held her gaze, then lowered his head just slightly. A nod. The kind a man gives to another man when no words are needed. Then he stepped forward, sat, cross-legged, like it was something he'd done before. The others followed. No talking, no glancing around, just stillness, like a chapel where breath and presence were the only offerings. Mavis didn't eat. She just sat on the other side of the stone and rested her palms on her knees, waiting, watching. One of the little ones, maybe the boldest, reached out and took a piece of cornbread, nibbled, passed a second piece to its sibling. The father reached for a cut of squash, examined it, then took a bite. It wasn't a feast. It was a communion. Nobody moved fast. Nobody filled their mouths like they were starving. They chewed slow, thoughtful, like the food wasn't the reason they came. The moon rose through the branches, casting that soft blue wash over everything. It made the fur on their arms glisten, made the steam rising from the meat shimmer like fog. I remember thinking the whole scene looked like it had already happened 100 years ago, and would happen again long after we were gone. Then the mother stood. She crossed the space between us, barefoot and steady, the child asleep on her back. She didn't make a sound, just reached into a pouch at her side and withdrew a small bundle, pale, delicate, tied with twine made of stripped bark. She laid it gently at Mavis' feet, then turned and walked back toward the trees. No words, no farewell, just silence. We didn't touch the bundle until they were gone. Mavis waited until their scent had faded from the air, until the frogs started calling again and the crickets took up their song. Then she opened it. Inside were ghost pipe flowers, white, translucent, like bone carved from moonlight. They weren't common. You had to know where to look. You had to understand where the soil was rich enough in decay, where the light barely touched. Mavis held them with care, touched them like they might dissolve. "They bring these for healing," she said softly. "For sorrow. For things the mind can't carry alone." She didn't say it out loud, but I knew what she meant. It wasn't just an apology for the child hurt in the trap. It was a blessing. For her. For us. For what we'd chosen not to become. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt too still, too full of the kind of quiet that comes after something sacred. So I walked back down to the stone. The food was gone, of course. All of it. Even the scraps. But what stayed with me wasn't the emptiness. It was the impression of where they sat. The faint dent of enormous legs folded beneath a body that could have broken us in seconds. The smear of cornbread on the rock. A single hair, long, dark, caught in the moss near the waterline. I stood there a long time. Not praying. Not hoping. Just being. Because that night, the forest didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like someone, and that someone had let us in. Eli said later, half awake in his bed, that it reminded him of church. I didn't disagree. But it wasn't about God. It was about grace, the kind that doesn't need music or sermons, the kind that shows up quiet, with bread and forgiveness, and sits down beside you like it's always belonged there. It started with a sound that didn't belong. I'd heard everything the woods had to offer by then. Owls trilling just before a storm, deer skittering through brush, the whistle of distant coyotes rising like a question and falling into hush. But this was different. It came from below the hill, deep near the tree line where the fog lingered even past noon. A low scrape, like claws across wood. Then a growl. Not like a bear, not like any dog I'd known. This was deeper, wet, and wrong. It was just past 1 a.m. when I heard it. I'd gotten up for water, past the kitchen window, and stopped cold. The woods outside weren't still like they usually were. The trees moved like they were being leaned into, like something heavy brushed through them without care. And the porch didn't feel like ours anymore. I stood there in the dark, glass in my hand, staring into black that didn't blink. Then I saw it. Not a shadow, a figure. Tall. Broader than the Bigfoot, but not in a peaceful way. Its arms hung lower, bent like it was ready to pounce, and its head too angular, the snout too long, the ears pointed back, twitching like a wolf's. But it wasn't a wolf. It stood on 2 legs, and its eyes glowed amber, even through the dark. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then it turned its head. Not fast. Just enough to let me know it saw me. I ducked, dropped the glass. It shattered. Eli came out of his room, rubbing his eyes, asking what the hell that noise was. Mavis was right behind him, already holding the shotgun, not asking questions. I whispered, "Something's out there." She didn't say a word. She walked to the front door, opened it just a crack, and looked. Then she shut it and bolted it tight. I'd never seen her hands shake until that night. We waited. Hours passed like thick molasses. The woods stayed quiet, but not safe. There was no knocking, no footprints, no gifts. Just that feeling. Like something mean had pulled up a chair and was watching without blinking. I didn't sleep. By morning, everything looked the same. Sunlight stretched through the trees like nothing happened. But I knew better. So did Mavis. She sent us out that afternoon to gather kindling near the west ridge, where the ground stayed dry and the moss didn't slip underfoot. She told us to stay together, to stay close. We didn't get far before we saw it. A patch of broken branches, deer fur caught in a bramble, and claw marks on the tree. Not just scratches, but gouges, long, deep. Too wide apart to be a cougar, too deliberate. That's when the smell hit us. Rot, wet fur, copper. I turned around, and standing across the clearing, no more than 20 yards off, was the thing, dog-like. Upright, muscles rolling under black fur, thick and coarse. Its shoulders flexed as it breathed. Its eyes locked on us with something between curiosity and hunger. And it grinned. A mouthful of teeth that didn't belong in anything natural. Eli froze. I stepped in front of him without thinking, but then came a sound I didn't expect. A low rumble, not from the creature, from behind us. The trees parted, and the father stepped out. The Bigfoot, calm, tall, towering over everything else, like a statue made of roots and rage. He didn't run. He didn't roar. He just stood between us and the thing. And then, silence. The two of them stared at each other like they'd met before, like something old was passing between them. I swear I could feel it in the dirt under my feet. The creature, dogman, whatever it was, tilted its head, snarled, The Bigfoot didn't flinch. He stepped forward once. The dogman let out a noise so sharp it felt like it pierced the air, but then it backed up. One step, then two. Then it turned and slipped into the trees, fast and low, like a shadow with claws, gone, just like that. The father turned, looked down at us. His eyes weren't soft this time. They were serious, watchful, like he was reminding us the woods weren't just home to one kind of secret. Then he was gone too. That night, Eli cried. Not from fear, not exactly, he said. They don't just feed us. They protect us. I didn't answer. I sat on the porch and stared into the woods, listening. The forest hadn't given us a gift that night. It had given us a warning, and it wasn't done speaking. I came back to Maple Creek Hollow 56 years after I left it. My hands were stiffer than I remembered. My knees caught every rise and root along the trail. I parked the rental down by the broken mile marker, where the asphalt gave up, and walked the rest of the way in with nothing but a thermos, my late wife's scarf around my neck, and a picture of Eli folded into my coat pocket like a prayer. The woods hadn't changed. And that's the thing about this place. The trees grow older, but never tired. The light still filters through the canopy like it's being filtered through memory. Every step I took down that path was like waking something up inside me that had been asleep for decades. I could smell the moss before I saw it. I could hear the creek long before it appeared, bending and curling the same way it did that summer of '57, when two boys came to live with a woman who didn't speak much, but somehow said everything that mattered. The cabin was still there, barely. The roof had caved in on the west side. Half the porch had rotted clean through. Kudzu had wrapped itself around the chimney like it was hugging the bones of something it couldn't let go. The windows were gone, the rocking chair too, but the stone steps, the ones we used to sit on every morning before chores, were still holding on. I stood there for a long time, not moving, not crying, not yet. There was no sign of Mavis, no grave marker, no letters tucked under a rock. She'd always said if she died alone out here, it was because she chose to, not because anyone left her behind. I walked around the back, past the old smokehouse, past the blackberry bramble Eli and I once fell into, screaming and laughing, until our shirts were torn to shreds. And then I saw it, just off the porch. The flat stone, the one Mavis used to use when she wanted to say something without speaking. It was clean, clear, and sitting right in the center of it, resting like it had been placed that very morning, was a single red apple, shiny, perfect, not a bite take. Beside it were two footprints, big ones, deep, one slightly ahead of the other like someone had stood still there for a long time before turning away. I didn't call out, didn't go looking. I just lowered myself down, knees popping, hands shaking, and pressed my palm against the edge of the nearest print. It was wider than my whole hand. I could feel the weight in it, like the earth still remembered the moment it was made. And I didn't hold it back. I let the tears fall, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, like everything else in this place had always been. Because that was the thing, wasn't it? We all want to be remembered, even if the ones who remember us don't speak our names, even if they never write it down or mark it on stone or whisper it into a fire. Sometimes remembering looks like an apple left in silence, a step held in dirt for someone else to find, a gift you leave not for praise, but because someone was kind to you once, and you never forgot. I sat there until the light started to shift, golden and low. The wind moved through the trees like breath, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. Before I left, I set the scarf down beside the apple, tucked it in just enough so the wind wouldn't carry it away. Then I stood, looked back one last time, and walked. I never saw them that day, but I didn't need to. They'd already said everything they needed to. Some stories don't end with answers. They end with echoes, soft, steady, folding themselves into the corners of the world like breath in winter. And if you're quiet long enough, if you listen with something deeper than your ears, you might just hear them. This was never a story about monsters, Not really. It was about presence, about the hush between two strangers who don't share a language, but somehow still understand each other. It was about kindness given without a promise of return, about protection that shows up not with noise but with patience, and forgiveness that doesn't need words. Just a place to sit and a moment to be still. Sometimes the most human things are found far beyond the boundaries of what we call civilization. Sometimes they grow wild, unseen, and sometimes they find their way back to us not with a roar, but with a single red apple left in silence. This story reminds us that love doesn't always speak out loud, that grace can take the shape of silence, and that the deepest connections are built not on what we say, but on what we do when no one's watching. We live in a world where so much is loud, so much is fast. And too often, we measure worth in attention and noise. But there are other ways of being, quieter ways, gentle ways, ways that don't clamor for recognition, but instead leave small, sacred traces behind, like footprints pressed into soft earth, waiting for someone to notice. And maybe, just maybe, we're not meant to understand everything we see in this life. Maybe the point isn't to solve the mystery. Maybe it's to respect it, to live in it, to let it shape us in the places no one else can see. Because memory is a kind of promise, and kindness, especially the kind that goes unspoken, is its own kind of legacy. If this story moved you, made you feel something real, or reminded you of someone you love, take a moment to let us know. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let your voice become part of the echo. And if you'd like to walk with us through more stories like this, stories that carry wonder, heartache, and a little bit of light in the dark, please consider subscribing to the channel and following along. You never know what waits in the woods, but some things are worth remembering. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.